What is needed is a way of saying something about the value of music that does not attempt to explicate it in non-musical terms, but does allow us to consider critically the claims that can be made on its behalf. Music and beauty. The uniqueness of music is worth exploring further. It is sometimes suggested, even by composers, that music is a refinement of things found in nature. The wind in the grass, the song of the birds, the sound of rushing water, and so on. Now it could be the case that the invention of some instruments came about in this way. The early origins of music are too remote for us to know. But what is not true is that these natural sounds are themselves a kind of music. Birds chattering, wind blowing, and water splashing have nothing remotely resembling the resonance, the structure, or the organization of the simplest composition for the smallest orchestra. The only thing in nature that is properly described as musical is the singing human voice. And of course, singing itself is a form of music. Music, then, is not just unique. It is a uniquely human, ignoring for present purposes the possibility of angelic voices. Music is something that human beings make, and their ability to make it has developed over a very long period of time. This is true even of singing. To hum or sing a series of notes is a spontaneous activity in human beings, perhaps, but to turn this series into an extended and developed melody with organized keys and scales is not. Singing even a popular song takes us far beyond the ability and inclination of the baby in the pram to make resonant noises. The point of stressing the non-natural character of music is this: music is not obtainable anywhere else than in the music-making activities of human beings. Why does this matter? If music is unique, then only in music can some values be realized. Nowhere else can we encounter values whose realization requires intentionally organized aural experience. One such value would be beauty in sound. Beautiful things are to be valued. And even if it is only in music that beautiful sounds are to be found, then music is uniquely valuable as our only source of one kind of beauty. This is a plausible line of argument. No one can doubt that beauty is something to value and that music is frequently beautiful. What can be doubted is whether this constitutes the final or most satisfactory explanation of its value. To begin with, the claim that beautiful sound is to be found only in music is too sweeping. While it is misleading to describe natural sounds like bird song or the low moan of the wind as music, it is quite plausible to describe some of them as beautiful. The cry of a bird has no melody, and is in no key. But some birds make an ugly noise, others a beautiful one. There is an unmistakable difference between speaking and singing. The second is music, the first is not. But I can properly describe someone as having a beautiful speaking voice. What such examples show is that there can be beautiful, but non-musical sounds, for which it follows that music is not uniquely valuable by being a source of beautiful sounds. Besides, beauty does not correlate very satisfactorily with creative accomplishment in music. A large-scale and complex symphony is no more and probably less beautiful to listen to than a simple melody for a single violin. We might usefully contrast here Beethoven's and Bruch's violin concertos. Bruch's, it seems to me, is the more beautiful, but Beethoven's the greater work. Certainly, melodies and harmonies can be extremely beautiful, but there is no reason to think that beauty and harshness exhaust the possibilities for assessing harmonic patterns or explaining what makes them worth hearing. Beethoven's harmonic structures are more frequently interesting than beautiful, but nonetheless valuable for that. In short, music may be our most familiar source of beautiful sound, but it is not only our only source, nor is its being such a source an adequate explanation of the value we attach to it. Nevertheless, there is something right about this general line of thought. Music is the sole source of organized sound. One end to which it can be used is the exemplification of beauty, but there are others. The philosopher Malcolm Budd identifies several of these when he writes, "One general value exemplified by many fine musical works is the unification of diverse material, so-called unity in diversity or organic unity. Other values that can be exemplified in music include beauty, gracefulness, wit, imagination, and mastery. Unblemished musical works that exemplify these values are paradigms of perfection, appreciated as such." This seems correct. Music exemplifies imagination and mastery, neither of which is exemplified in natural sounds, however beautiful, and it exemplifies these in a unique medium. Nowhere else do we find exercises of imagination that create structures out of sonic materials. Is this, then, the final explanation of the value of music, and is it sufficient? Budd obviously thinks so, since he concludes by asking, how could anything be more demanded of music as an abstract art? But there is at least one further feature we can add. When we listen to music, we are presented with not only evidence of the composer's imagination and mastery, but an exploration of one aspect of human experience, oral experience. Music as the exploration of sound. Music is for listening to, as nothing else is. When I listen to you speaking, or listen for the doorbell, or the sound of a taxi arriving to collect me, I am listening for the meanings of these sounds, what you are saying, not how you are saying it. What the doorbell signifies, not how it sounds. But music presents us with occasions for pure listening. This is why it is important not to attribute to it emotional content or representative meaning, because both of these would lead us past the music, in the way that listening out for information on the radio, say, leads us past the distinctive sound that radio voices make. In this way, music is the direct and immediate exploration of oral experience. And what is interesting about it is the richness it can have. So accustomed are we to listen past the sounds we hear, and thus to regard them as mere media. It may come as a surprise that sound itself can have such a remarkably complex nature. So complex, in fact, that it can sustain a rich descriptive vocabulary drawn by extension from the worlds of emotion, vision, engineering, narrative. What is striking about music is that it is described as bright, or sorrowful, or architectonic, or work comprising a theme and its development. is not that they in some odd way are connected with lights or emotions or buildings or stories, but that sound, pure sound, can have properties so much more sophisticated than simple, loud, soft, fast, slow. Once we understand the centrality of aural experience to music, we can see how there can be intelligible and demonstrable differences between the creations and the explorations of different composers. A composer invites us to discover new qualities of sound, qualities that we have to describe in metaphorical or analogical language. It is not analysis of their meaning by musicologists or the observation of moods induced in listeners in which these qualities are demonstrated by the performer in the music, and we apprehend them not by reading the score or the program notes, but by listening, borrowing an expression from literary theory. We could say that music is the foregrounding of sound. In music, noise making ceases to be a mere means of expression or communication, and ceases indeed to be mere noise. Aural experience becomes the focus of interest in its own right. Reflection and analysis can help us discover the properties of a piece of music, certainly, and where the music is of a highly developed sort. We may need the vocabulary of technical analysis to isolate and describe the structures of sound to be found within it. Nevertheless, if we are to know that these sounds have that property, listening is inescapable. If we locate the value of music in its unique ability to extend and explore aural experience, we cannot have that experience non-aurally, and thus the activity of actually listening to music cannot be eliminated. The theory of music as aural foregrounding avoids the danger of making music redundant, which, as we saw earlier, is the principal defect in theories that locate its value in pleasure, emotion, or representation. It has this further advantage. We saw earlier in the chapter that any propositional meanings we are inclined to attach to pieces of absolute music are invariably ambiguous, because there is nothing about the music that directs, as opposed to prompts, our thoughts. But now we can see that as the painter directs our visual perceptions, so the composer and the performer direct our aural perceptions. Listening to music is not just a matter of sound pouring into a receptor, but of the mind being directed through a series of perceptions. We are, so to speak, guided through our experience. It is as though the composer were saying, it must be heard this way, by actually making us hear it that way. An analogy might be this. We enter a series of underground caverns where our journey can take alternative routes through spaces of differing shape, dimension, and atmosphere, lighted by different means. Each composer is the guide who decides upon the lighting and directs us through the caverns. The shapes and dimensions of the caves are there for all to see, of course, but they can be seen only this way or that. The way we see them and the ways that are especially worth seeing are matters for which we rely upon our guides. If the final answer to the question, what is the value of music, is that music provides us with means of exploring the dimensions of aural experience, someone might then ask, what is so important about exploring aural experience? To this question, the only answer would appear to be that aural experience is part of a distinctly human experience. We have every reason to think that other animals equipped with auditory powers can hear music, but only human beings can listen to it. It is by enlarging and exploring this dimension of experience that music assists us in understanding better what it is to be a human being. Aesthetic cognitivism can to this extent be applied to music. Compositions are objects of understanding in their own right. To understand the structure of a piece of music and apprehend the full range of its tonal, rhythmic, and harmonic properties is an achievement, just as understanding a mathematical proof is an achievement. Its composition is also an achievement, an act of thought and imagination, that it is also comparable to the creative mind of the mathematician. Music is thus a source of understanding, but contrary to the implied suggestion in Beethoven's claim about revelation, it does not offer us any understanding of the non-musical. Nevertheless, the aural is a world of experience, and music offers us an understanding of that world. In this way, the value of great music may be explained as the value of great art. Sonic art and digital technology. This explanation of the value of music rests heavily on music giving us unique access to the world of sound by foregrounding it. Is it really true that only music can do this? Until the early decades of the 20th century, the answer would have seemed obvious. There's nothing to compare with music and nothing to substitute for it. But three important developments can be seen to introduce new possibilities. The first of these developments was the experimental music that originated with the Viennese composer Arnold Schoenberg, 1874 to 1951. Having come to believe the normal resources of tonal music in the European tradition were close to exhaustion, Schoenberg became the advocate of atonalism and then the inventor of serialism. Serialism is a method of composing that abandons traditional harmonic structures in favor of a composition that arranges 12 tones in accordance with quasi-mathematical rules. Composing in this way results in a radically different sound, since it has nothing in it that strikes the ear as melody or harmony, and although the basic materials out of which such compositions are built are tones, this strangeness is described as atonal. Schoenberg's serialism was taken up with great enthusiasm by other composers, notably Anton Webern, 1883 to 1945, and Alban Berg, 1885 to 1935. But serialism proved too constricting. Even Schoenberg broke his own rules, and atonal music proved to have difficulty in attracting and retaining audiences. Schoenberg's significance, however, lies not so much in the method he invented as the great wave of experimentalism in music that he inaugurated. Subsequent composers, Pierre Boulez, 1925, and Karlheinz Stockhausen, 1928, and especially Edgar Varese, 1883 to 1965, went much further and began to incorporate in their compositions a quite different range of sounds and devices: vacuum cleaners, bat and ball, and gunshots, passages of screaming and shouting as well as singing, and a prepared piano with nuts and bolts on other items inserted into it, the keyboard of which the pianist does not merely play with fingers, but thumps with arms and elbows as well. Several of these experimentalists began to capitalize upon a second important development: the invention of sound recording. Stockhausen used electrically generated tones, and Varese employed recording devices extensively. The ability to record sound and then manipulate it meant that, for the first time, non-musical sounds could be combined in structured ways. Early attempts to do so sound primitive now, but that is because they were wholly experimental. What emerged was a new type of composition, One of its most successful exponents is the American composer Steve Reich, 1936. Reich composes tonal music in which recording devices are used to combine both instruments and singers in highly repetitive, mesmeric patterns of sound. But he also created compositions out of the speaking voice. This is atonalism, properly so called, because its basic materials are not tones at all, but simply sounds. Schoenberg's atonalism was highly experimental, but it was with composers like Varese and Reich that the possibility of non-musical composition came about. It is a possibility that was usually extended with the third major development, the invention of digital technology. Digital technology has not merely made computers and the internet part of everyday life. It has also transformed some of the media important to the arts. Electronic instruments and digital cameras are obvious examples, but the real significance of digital technology lies in the vast power of detailed manipulation, both of images and sounds, that it has made possible. Following in the wake of groundbreaking musical experiments such as those of Schoenberg and others, the combination of recording equipment and digital technology has finally brought about a completely new way of foregrounding sound and hence exploring the world of aural experience. What is this new medium to be called? The names it is actually given: electroacoustic music, sound art, sonic art, vary chiefly with respect to their differing connotations. The first signals a belief on the part of many new composers that this form of composition is continuous with music. It also constitutes their claim to the status of music. The second is the name generally given to aural presentations in art galleries, and for this reason implies a move away from the music of the concert hall in a closer alliance with the plastic arts of painting and sculpture. But there is reason to prefer the third because it signals correctly that this new style of composition uses sound, but not music as an art material. Of course, musical composition also uses sound, so that sonic art could serve as an umbrella term for both musical and electroacoustic composition. Is electroacoustic composition music? This is a question that has been quite widely discussed, and yet it does not seem to be of very much consequence. The important point is that a completely different way of foregrounding sound has come into existence. And what is interesting is not what we should call it, but whether it matches or even rivals the sonic art, traditional music that came before it. Conventional music is a structured exploration of tonal sounds, deploying certain recognized variables: harmony, rhythm, timbre, form, texture chiefly. Natural sounds, such as bird song and waterfalls, do not have this tonal quality. That is why it is misleading to call them music, but it does not follow that they have no aural interest. If they are not especially worth listening to it in and for themselves, that is because they lack any structure. As Arnold Eisenberg once pointed out, Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee is worth listening to because it does not replicate the monotony of an actual bee in flight. But now, digital technology has provided us with the means whereby the aural interest that there is in the sound of the bee can be isolated, captured, and manipulated into a form that does have structure. In other words, thanks to digital technology, natural and other non-musical sounds cannot just be foregrounded. They can be turned into structures that make them worth listening to. Digital composition need not, of course, renounce musical sound, but it is not restricted to it. With digital technology, singing can become the noise of screaming, which in turn can be transformed into the sound of the wind, or for that matter, into sounds whose novelty is such that we cannot easily name them in this way. Echoes and reverberations that are not possible in standard kinds of music can be manipulated into structured forms as theme and variation with recapitulation, coda, and so on. And all such constructions can be more or less imaginative, more or less compelling to listen to. We can call this music if we wish, but to do so is to disguise its radical novelty. This is why I shall use the term electroacoustic art. But the important point is not whether we decide to call it music or something else, but whether, compared to conventional music, electrosonic art is an enrichment or an impoverishment. In part, this is a question that cannot yet be decided. We have seen at several points in this chapter that music can sustain the use of a very important and wide range of descriptive terms. The ease and naturalness with which, for instance, the language of emotion is applied to music leads to the errors of expressivism, which mistakes analogical extension for literal meaning. But the use of this language is still in place. Music can be happy, solemn, somber, exciting, etc. Can these terms and the full range of terms normally applied to music also be applied to the composition of electrosonic art? It is too early to say, because not enough composition of this kind has entered the general consciousness. When it does, we will discover how people who are neither composers nor advocates naturally describe it, just as we will discover whether they enthusiastically attend recitals. But a more important issue is this: are such recitals performances? Electroacoustic composition of this kind is inextricably connected with the technology that makes it possible. In some of the experimental music previously referred to, composers who wanted to incorporate non-musical sounds into their compositions devised new systems of notation that would instruct the instrumentalists in how to produce sounds other than tones. The Polish composer Witold Lutosławski, 1913 to 1994, was well known for this. But in composition that uses digital technology to produce sounds, there is no need to do this. In fact, there is no place for it. Because the composition and its realization are one and the same. In other words, there is no gap, either temporal or conceptual, between composition and performance. The sort of gap that there is between a musical score and its realization. What this implies, however, is that this new music is indeed radically new. It has eliminated something which hitherto has been an essential feature of music, namely performance. Electroacoustic composers tend to deny this implication and assert that performance has not been eliminated so much as changed its character. No less important than the sounds that comprise an electroacoustic composition in this way, it is listened to. That is why they devote considerable attention to the positioning of speakers in relation to the audience and to the order in which the recorded sound is relayed through those speakers. Since the positioning of speakers and the order in which they are used can differ from occasion to occasion, it seems to make sense to refer to different performances of the same electroacoustic composition. But are these really performances rather than recitals? We can say that there is a scope here for something we might call interpretation. Though in the normal case, the interpreter will be the composer. But it does not seem that there is any artistic space for a performer, still less for a whole group of performers. Why does this matter? It matters partly because interpretation in performance is, for both the performer and the audience, a significant further avenue for the exploration of sound. It is commonly said in program notes and reviews that great performers have the ability to get inside a piece of music and reveal its true character. These may be metaphorical ways of speaking, but they do capture a real important dimension of music making and its value. It is precisely because of this that we can speak meaningfully of definitive performances. Conventional music, in other words, provides for a collaborative exploration of sound by composer and performer, and arranger sometimes. In digital composition, by contrast, it seems that in principle, the composer does everything. But more importantly, if it is true that electroacoustic composition does not admit of performance, this makes it radically different from music, since music is one of the performing arts. Sonic art without performance is the equivalent to sound in visual art. Painting, engraving, and so on, a construction presented by the composer to an audience. By excluding performance, electroacoustic art is not merely a radical innovation in the long tradition of music. It is a departure from its essential character. But to see what this means and why it matters, we will have to wait until Chapter 8 and the examination of performing art in general. Summary. It is evident that music gives many people great pleasure. Also true is that it is widely believed to be expressive of some of the deepest human emotions. Neither fact properly explains its value, however. Pleasure does not explain the distinction between light and profound in music, and may even give us reason to prefer less profound music. Although music can properly be described in emotional terms, these terms have an analogical or metaphorical meaning when extended to music, and this makes it questionable whether music can be said to express emotion in its ordinary human sense. Several important writers on music have attributed to music both a power to represent and the properties of a language. Upon examination, however, it can be shown that the power of music to represent is limited and dependent upon conventional associations. At best, The analogy with language shows that music has a vocabulary, but not grammatical structures. This means that though it may be used to prompt thoughts and impressions, it does not have the capacity of a genuine form of communication. Nevertheless, a connection may be made between music and the cognitivist theory of art. Music is special among art forms. While in theory, photography could replace painting or cinema, replace theater, nothing could replace the experience of hearing music. Music is unique in providing us with extended structures of organized sound, by means of which we may explore human experience. And in conventional musical sound, this richness is increased by the possibility of interpretive performance. However, the aspect of human experience we explore with the assistance of great music is not that of the emotional or intellectual life, but the experience of hearing itself. To claim this as the distinguishing feature of music as an art is not to diminish its importance, because active listening, by contrast with passive hearing, is one aspect of the self-consciousness that makes human existence what it is. Over the last 100 years or so, experimental music, sound recording, and digital technology have combined to present new possibilities which challenge the uniqueness of music. Whether we call these innovations music or not, they are radically different, since they depart entirely from tonality. But they may also differ in another important respect, that unlike conventional music, they remove the exploration of sound from the realms of performing art.